During Thanksgiving dinner, I inquired if the hospital had sent my surgery date to my parents. They calmly replied, "Yes, it arrived, but we spent your surgery funds on your brother's birthday. He only gets one birthday a year." I placed my fork down. "So, I guess you still don't quite realize who truly needs the surgery." Their faces went pale. "Then who is it?" they instantly questioned. The clatter of a porcelain fork against my grandmother's finest china wasn't just a sound. It was the sharp, undeniable puncturing of an illusion. One moment, the Thanksgiving table was a tableau of festive comfort, the turkey gleaming, cranberry sauce jewel-toned, a fragile piece hanging in the air. The next, that brittle sound splintered it all. My blood ran colder than the autumn air outside as the words, spoken with a practiced calm I didn't feel, hung heavy. Did the hospital send my surgery appointment yet? My gaze flickered between my parents, Frank and Carol, then settled on Jake, my younger brother, who was expertly carving another thick slice of white meat, his usual exuberance muted by a slight, almost imperceptible wince. Their shared glance, fleeting but loaded, was all the answer I needed. Dad cleared his throat, a nervous little sound, and Mom dabbed her lips with a linen napkin, avoiding my eyes. "They did, Tommy," she murmured, her voice a little too bright. "Last week, actually. But we used your surgery money for Jake's birthday party. He only has one birthday a year." The fork fell from my grasp, the metallic ping echoing the hollow ache in my chest. A cold, suffocating dread seized me, tightening around my throat until I could barely breathe. My palms grew slick with a sudden sweat, but I forced my voice to remain even, almost detached. "I guess you still don't know who really needs the surgery." The color drained from their faces, leaving them ghostly pale. Confusion flickered in their eyes, quickly replaced by a dawning, terrifying fear. Jake froze, his fork suspended midair, a slice of turkey impaled on its tines. "What are you talking about, Tommy?" Mom whispered, her voice barely a breath. I leaned back in my chair, allowing myself to truly see Jake. The subtle shift in his weight, the way he favored his right side, the prescription bottle I'd glimpsed him shoving into his pocket when I arrived, it all clicked into place with sickening clarity. Here's the thing about families, sometimes the hardest truths are the ones we deliberately turn away from. For years, my parents had cultivated an image of Jake as their shining star, while I was simply the responsible one. This cognitive bias, where information that supports pre-existing beliefs is easily accepted and contradictory evidence is dismissed, allowed them to overlook glaring signs of Jake's suffering while simultaneously justifying their blatant disregard for my needs. "Jake's been hiding it from you for months," I stated, the words coming out steady, despite the hurricane churning inside me. "Haven't you, little brother?" Jake's face went ashen, matching the stark white of Grandma's china. His hands trembled as he slowly set down his fork. "I don't know what you're talking about," he mumbled, but his eyes darted nervously toward the stairs, toward his room, where I knew his secrets lay hidden. But that was only the beginning of the nightmare. 3 months ago, I continued, watching my parents' stunned faces. "Remember when Jake fell off the Hendersons' roof? You thought he was just drunk again, stumbling around after that party." My voice hardened, laced with the accumulated resentment of years. "But he didn't just bruise his ego that night. He broke his back." Dad's brow furrowed, a slow dawning of comprehension. "He said he was fine, a little sore." "Tommy, stop," Jake pleaded, genuine panic now lacing his voice, his breath shallow and ragged. But I couldn't stop. Not after spending the last year working 60-hour weeks at Peterson's Auto Repair, my hands cracked and bleeding from oil and metal, saving every penny for my herniated disc surgery. Not after seeing them spend $12,000 on a 4-hour birthday bash. "Show them your prescription bottles, Jake," I said quietly, my voice a low rumble. "The oxycodone, the muscle relaxers, the anti-inflammatories you hide in your old baseball mitt." Mom gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Jake, is this true?" He didn't answer, his breathing becoming even more shallow. "Their golden child, their pride and joy, their investment. The one who could do no wrong." While I scraped and saved and sacrificed. How did you know? He whispered, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and surprise. Because I've been watching you suffer for weeks. I snapped, my anger finally boiling over, a searing heat rushing through my veins. I've watched you take pills before breakfast. I've seen you grip the stair railing like your life depends on it. You can barely lift a gallon of milk without your face contorting in agony. I turned to my parents, who sat frozen, mouths agape. And I've been watching both of you ignore it, because acknowledging it would mean admitting your precious son isn't perfect. Mom's eyes filled with tears, spilling silently down her cheeks. We didn't know, Tommy. We had no idea he was in pain. You didn't want to know, I corrected her, my voice cutting. Just like you didn't want to know I've been working double shifts since last Christmas, skipping meals, driving a car with 200,000 miles on it because I couldn't afford repairs. All to fix a back injury that happened at the construction site. You told me to quit because college was more important. Jake tried to stand, but his legs buckled beneath him. He grabbed the table's edge, a spasm tearing through his back so violently he cried out. Jesus, Dad breathed, finally seeing. The sound of Jake's raw pain was a stark contrast to the quiet manipulation that had pervaded our family for so long. It started as a dull ache, Jake admitted, his voice breaking, tears now streaming down his face. After the fall, I thought it would go away, but it got worse every week. I can barely sleep. I can't concentrate. I've been buying pain pills from Danny Morrison because I was too scared to tell you guys. My heart broke a little, despite my fury. Jake was 25, but in that moment, he looked like the scared little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Why didn't you say anything? Mom asked, reaching for him, then stopping, her hand hovering awkwardly. Because you've spent the last 5 years telling everyone how proud you are of me, Jake choked out, the words laced with a profound sadness. How I'm going to make something of myself. How I'm different from other kids my age. How could I tell you I'm just as broken as everyone else? That familiar surge of resentment, my lifelong companion, flared hot. Even now, Jake was positioning himself as the victim. Do you want to know the difference between us, Jake? I asked, standing, my voice rising. When I got hurt, I went to work anyway. I saved my money. I scheduled my surgery. I took responsibility. You got hurt, partied your pain away, and let everyone else deal with the consequences. That's not fair, Tommy, my mother protested, her voice weak. Fair. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that barely recognized itself. What's fair is that the person who actually needs surgery gets it. And Jake's MRI shows 3 herniated discs and spinal compression that could leave him paralyzed if it gets worse. Silence. Only Jake's labored breathing filled the room. How do you know about his MRI? My father asked, his voice barely a whisper. Because I drove him to get it last week when he collapsed at his apartment, I replied, the truth hitting them like a physical blow. I've been taking care of this while you planned his birthday party. Jake's face crumpled completely. I'm sorry, Tommy. I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to tell them. I didn't know how to ask for help. Before I could respond, Jake's knees gave out. He crashed to the floor, his back seizing in a spasm so violent his scream echoed off the dining room walls, a raw, primal sound that cut deeper than any words. The sound snapped something inside me, but not in the way I expected. As my parents scrambled to Jake's side, their voices high-pitched and panicked, I walked calmly to my father's home office. Tommy, where are you going? My mother cried, her voice cracking. We need to call 911. Jake will be fine in a few minutes, I called back, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. His pain comes in waves. This isn't the first time I've seen him like this. I had been thinking about this moment for weeks. Ever since realizing my parents still had access to my old bank account, the one I never closed because it was easier. The one that should have held $15,000, not the $3,000 I saw in my last statement. My hands, which had just moments ago been slick with fear, now shook with a cold, almost surgical precision as I pulled out bank statements and credit reports. My parents were too focused on Jake's cries from the dining room to notice me spreading documents across the mahogany desk. The first irregularity jumped out, July 15th, $2,800 withdrawal. The same day, Jake posted photos of his new car's down payment. September 3rd, $1,500. Jake's college textbooks. But the deeper I dug, the sicker I became. March of last year, $3,000. His spring break trip to Cancun. October, $1,000. His motorcycle payment. Loans I never applied for. A credit card in my name with an $8,000 balance. A $12,000 personal loan supposedly taken out in May. All with my forged signature. I photographed everything with my phone, each click a hammer blow against my parents' deception. My anger transformed into a cold, hard determination. Years of wondering why my savings grew so slowly. Years of feeling guilty while Jake lived like a trust fund baby on an auto mechanic's salary. "Tommy, what are you doing in there?" My father's voice, now closer, cut through my thoughts. "Finding out how much you've stolen from me," I called back, pulling out my credit report, the words heavy with accusation. When I returned to the dining room, Jake was back in his chair, breathing slowly, returning to normal, though still pale and shaky. My parents looked up expectantly, as if I'd fetched pain meds. Instead, I placed the bank statements on the table next to the turkey platter, the crisp paper a stark contrast to the festive meal. "Interesting reading," I said, sitting down, the anger a controlled burn beneath my skin. "Dad, want to explain this withdrawal pattern, or should I start with the credit accounts you opened in my name?" My father's face strained, his jaw slack. "Tommy, I can explain." "Please do," I said, spreading the documents like a hand of cards. "Start with the car loan. Did you really think I wouldn't figure out you co-signed for Jake's Honda using my credit history?" My mother's hands trembled as she picked up the statement, her eyes wide with fear. "We were going to pay it back," she whispered. "When?" I asked, my voice rising, an edge of incredulity. "Before or after you used my surgery fund for Jake's birthday party?" Jake stared at the papers, horror dawning in his eyes. "Mom, Dad, what is this? What did you do?" "We were helping you build your future," my father said, his voice lacking any conviction, a flimsy excuse crumbling under the weight of evidence. "Your brother has a stable job. He could afford to help out family." "By stealing from me?" I asked, my voice a dangerous whisper. "By forging my signature, by spending money I earned while telling me I needed to be more responsible?" I pulled out my phone, reading from my notes. June 5th, 2022, $800. The same day Jake needed gym membership money. September 12th, $1,200 for Jake's computer. December 20th, $2,000 for Jake's holiday spending spree. With each date, Jake's expression grew more stricken. "I didn't know," he said quietly, his voice filled with genuine distress. "I thought you guys were helping me with your own money." "Of course you didn't ask questions," I replied, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Why would you? It's easier to take than to earn." My mother stood abruptly, pacing toward the window, her back to us. "We thought you understood that family helps each other. Jake needed support to get established. You were already working, already stable." "Stable?" I laughed again, a sharper, more painful sound. "Do you know why I've been eating ramen 4 nights a week? Why I haven't bought new clothes in 2 years? Why I drive a car that breaks down every other month? Because you've been systematically draining my accounts to fund Jake's lifestyle." The front door opened then, a surreal intrusion of normalcy. "Hello, Tommy. Your mom said I should come straight in." Sarah, my girlfriend, appeared in the doorway, still in her nurse scrubs, her face tired but kind. She took in the scene, documents scattered, Jake pale and shaken, my parents guilty and trapped. "What's going on?" she asked, her eyes scanning the room, her professional instincts already kicking in as she moved to stand beside me. "My parents have been stealing from my surgery fund," I said simply, the bluntness of the statement cutting through the tension like a knife. "For years, apparently." Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She knelt beside Jake, checking his pulse, his posture. "You're in significant pain," she observed, her voice calm and clinical. "How long has this been going on?" 3 months, maybe longer, Jake admitted, his voice small. Sarah stood, her expression professional, but now undeniably cold. "And you didn't notice your son was suffering from what appears to be a severe spinal injury?" We thought he was just adjusting to adult life, my mother said weakly, still staring out the window. Tommy's been telling me about his financial struggles for months, Sarah said, picking up a bank statement, her eyes narrowing. He's been skipping meals to save money for surgery. I offered to help, but he insisted on paying his own way. Now I understand why he's been struggling. My father tried damage control, a desperate attempt to restore order. Sarah, you don't understand our family dynamics. Tommy's always been the responsible one. We knew he could handle it. Handle having his money stolen? Sarah asked sharply, her voice barely controlled. Handle working himself into exhaustion while you funded Jake's partying? It wasn't partying, my mother protested, finally turning. We were investing in Jake's future, his potential. What potential? I asked, standing up, my voice infused with a profound weariness. Jake dropped out of college 3 times. He's never held a job for longer than 6 months. He spends every weekend at bars or house parties. What exactly were you investing in? Jake's face crumpled. I never graduated, he whispered, the admission hitting the room like a physical blow. What? My father asked, the single word thick with disbelief. I never finished college. I dropped out 2 years ago. I've been lying to you, telling you I was taking classes when I was really just trying to figure out my life. The money you gave me for tuition, I used it for other things. My mother sank back into her chair, her face contorted. 2 years. You've been lying to us for 2 years. I couldn't disappoint you again, Jake said, tears flowing freely now. You were so proud when I enrolled. You told everyone I was going to be the first college graduate in our family. I couldn't take that away from you. Sarah pulled out her phone. I'm going to show you something. She opened her banking app. This is my savings account, $15,000. I've been setting it aside to help Tommy with medical expenses because I was worried about how thin he's been stretching himself. She looked directly at my parents, her gaze unwavering. I make $38,000 a year as a registered nurse. I've managed to save this much in 18 months by budgeting carefully and living within my means. Tommy makes $45,000 as a mechanic. How is it possible that he has less saved than I do? Unless someone has been taking his money. The question hung in the air like smoke, choking the life out of any remaining pretense. My father cleared his throat, a weak, defeated sound. We were going to tell you eventually about the loans. We figured you'd understand once Jake got established and could pay you back. With what job? I asked, the words sharp. What income? What skills? You've enabled him to be completely dependent on you while making me pay for the privilege of being responsible. I gathered all the documents, the rustle of paper of final condemnation, and headed for the door. I'm going home to figure out exactly how much you've stolen from me. And then I'm deciding whether to involve the police or just cut you out of my life entirely. Tommy, wait, my mother cried, scrambling to her feet. We can work this out. We're family. I turned back, my hand on the doorknob, my voice low and fierce. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't forge signatures. And family doesn't lie about it for years while watching one child struggle to pay for medical care they desperately need. As I reached for my jacket, Jake spoke up again, his voice barely audible, but resonant with a fresh layer of fear. There's something else you should know, he said quietly. The loan documents. I signed some of them too. Dad told me you had agreed to help me out, and I just needed to co-sign as a formality. My hand froze on the doorknob. What loan documents? Jake pulled out his phone. The home equity loan against the house, $15,000. Dad said you wanted to help with home improvements, and it was easier to use the house as collateral. Sarah and I exchanged glances, a silent question passing between us. Tommy, she said carefully. What home improvements? I looked around our dining room, at the same faded wallpaper, the worn carpet, the old fixtures. There weren't any home improvements, I said slowly, the words hollow. And that's when I realized the depth of their deception went far beyond anything I had imagined. The revelation about the home equity loan hit me like a physical punch, staggering me more than any of the previous financial betrayals. I stared at Jake, trying to process his admission, when suddenly his face contorted in agony. He pitched forward in his chair, a strangled cry escaping his lips. Jake, my mother screamed, her voice piercing. This wasn't like before. His back arched unnaturally, his hands clawing at the table as waves of spasms tore through his spine. His breathing came in short, desperate gasps. When he tried to speak, only guttural sounds emerged, raw and terrified. Sarah immediately dropped to her knees, her nurse instincts taking over, overriding any personal shock. "Call 911 right now," she commanded, her voice sharp, authoritative. Her hands moved gently, professionally, supporting Jake's head and neck. This is not a normal muscle spasm. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking uncontrollably, the adrenaline surging through me, creating a buzzing in my ears. My parents stood frozen in terror, unable to move, their faces masks of pure horror. 911, what's your emergency? I need an ambulance at 15 Oak Street, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded, a stark contrast to the chaos inside me. 25-year-old male with severe back injury, experiencing what appears to be a spinal crisis. Sarah was speaking in low, reassuring tones to Jake, who was writhing silently now, his face slick with sweat. Try to stay as still as possible. Don't fight the pain. Just breathe through it. Help is coming. But Jake's condition deteriorated rapidly. His legs began to twitch uncontrollably, small, involuntary movements that escalated into violent spasms. When Sarah asked him to wiggle his toes, nothing happened. I can't feel my feet, Jake whispered, panic rising in his voice, his eyes wide and vacant. Sarah, I can't feel anything below my knees. The ambulance arrived within 8 minutes, but those minutes felt like hours, each ticking second stretching into an eternity of fear and helplessness. Paramedics worked efficiently, their movements precise, stabilizing Jake's neck and spine before carefully transferring him to a stretcher. Sarah rode with him, her face grim. I followed my parents to Mercy General Hospital, the silence in the car deafening, broken only by my mother's quiet sobs. The emergency room was a blur of fluorescent lights, hushed voices, and sterile smells. Jake disappeared behind curtains while we sat in the waiting area, the harsh lights buzzing, amplifying the stark reality of our situation. My mother alternated between crying and praying, her rosary clutched tightly in her trembling hands. My father stared blankly at the worn carpet, his usual commanding presence utterly dissolved. Dr. Martinez emerged after what felt like an eternity, his face serious. "Are you Jake's family?" he asked. "Yes," my father said, standing quickly, a flicker of his old self returning, though tinged with desperation. "How is he?" Dr. Martinez consulted his chart, his gaze unwavering. "Your son has severe compression of his lumbar spine with potential nerve damage. We need to operate within the next 12 to 18 hours to prevent permanent paralysis." My mother's legs gave out, and she collapsed back into the hard plastic chair, a guttural sob escaping her lips. "What kind of operation?" I asked, my voice steady, though my heart pounded against my ribs. "Spinal decompression and fusion. It's a complex procedure, but necessary to restore function." My father nodded, his face pale. "Whatever he needs." "When can you schedule it?" Dr. Martinez looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. "I need to speak with you about insurance coverage. Your son's policy appears to have lapsed." "Lapsed?" my mother asked, the single word a whisper of utter disbelief. "What do you mean?" A financial coordinator, Jennifer Walsh, appeared, her expression sympathetic but firm. "Jake's insurance was canceled approximately 2 months ago due to non-payment of premiums." My father's face went white, a ghost of a man. "That's impossible. We set up automatic payments." "The account the payments were drawing from was closed in August," Jennifer explained gently. "The insurance company sent several notices before canceling the policy." I felt that familiar cold realization settle in my stomach, a heavy, sickening weight. My mind raced, connecting the dots. "What account was closed in August?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Jennifer consulted her tablet. "The joint checking account ending in 4792. I knew that account number. It was the emergency fund my parents had maintained for family medical expenses. The account they told me was specifically for situations like this. Where did that money go?" I asked my father directly, my gaze unblinking. He couldn't meet my eyes. Jake's birthday party was more expensive than we anticipated. The venue, the catering, the band. You spent the insurance premium money on a party. Sarah asked, her voice sharp with disbelief, having rejoined us. We thought we could replace it before the next payment was due, my mother said weakly, wringing her hands. Jennifer cleared her throat, her voice breaking the tense silence. The surgery will cost approximately $50,000 if performed as an emergency procedure. If we can delay until a charity bed opens up, the cost would be significantly reduced, but the wait could be several weeks. Dr. Martinez shook his head, his expression grim. I don't recommend waiting. The compression is severe enough that every day increases the risk of permanent damage. I stared at my parents, watching them grapple with the brutal consequences of their irresponsibility. Jake could be paralyzed for life because they couldn't resist an extravagant birthday party. Here's a crucial insight into family systems. This situation exemplifies what psychologists call the identified patient dynamic. Often, in dysfunctional families, one member, Jake in this case, is tacitly or overtly identified as the problem or the golden child, drawing all attention, while the underlying issues of the family system, like financial abuse, lack of boundaries, and parental favoritism, remain unaddressed. This dynamic ensures that the true sources of conflict are never confronted, allowing the dysfunction to persist and escalate. What are our options? My father asked, his voice strained. Jennifer pulled out forms. Emergency financial assistance, 3 to 5 business days. Payment plans require substantial down payments or payment in full before surgery. How much down payment? My mother asked, her voice trembling. $25,000. The silence was deafening, suffocating. My parents looked at each other, then at me, then at Sarah. Their eyes pleading, desperate, as if one of us might magically produce that amount. Tommy, my father said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. You have good credit. Maybe you could take out a loan. I stood up abruptly, a white-hot rage searing through me, burning away any remaining shred of sympathy. Are you serious? After everything you've done, you want me to go into debt to fix this? He's your brother, my mother pleaded, her voice rising in a desperate wail. And you're his parents, I replied, my voice hard, unwavering. You're the ones who stole money that could have paid for this surgery. You're the ones who spent his insurance premium money on a party. You're the ones who created this situation. Sarah placed her hand on my arm, her touch a grounding force. Tommy, she said softly. I have the money. My savings could cover the down payment. I stared at her, my mind reeling. Absolutely not. This isn't your responsibility. But it's not really about responsibility anymore, she said, her eyes fixed on mine, clear and resolute. It's about Jake's life. He could be paralyzed. Tears stung my eyes, a surprising betrayal. Sarah, willing to sacrifice her entire savings for my brother, who had shown her nothing but polite indifference. The same brother who had unknowingly benefited from years of stolen money. I need some air, I said, my voice thick with emotion, and walked toward the exit, needing to escape the suffocating weight of it all. Outside, the November evening was crisp and clear, a biting wind offering a momentary reprieve from the heated tension within. I sat on a concrete bench, the cold seeping through my jeans, trying to think. Jake was in a hospital bed facing permanent disability. My parents created this through years of selfishness and manipulation. Sarah was ready to sacrifice everything she had. And I was the one who had to decide whether to enable my parents' behavior one more time or let my brother suffer the consequences of their choices. My phone buzzed, a jarring sound in the quiet night. A text from Jake. He'd convinced a nurse to let him send it. Tommy, don't blame yourself for this. I know what they did to you. I recorded everything on my phone before the ambulance came. They can't lie anymore. Don't sacrifice yourself or Sarah for their mistakes. I love you, brother. I stared at the message, the words blurring through unshed tears. Jake had been more aware of our family dynamics than I'd given him credit for. And more importantly, he had evidence of our parents' admissions. I stood up, the cold concrete bench suddenly feeling less real than the clarity in my mind. I walked back into the hospital. But instead of going to the waiting room, I went to the information desk. "I need to speak with Patient Financial Services," I said, my voice firm. "And I need to make some phone calls." It was time to force my parents to face the full truth. What I uncovered next would shake the very foundations of our family. I spent 45 minutes in the hospital's family consultation room, the fluorescent lights humming, making the silence feel even heavier. Using their phone and Wi-Fi, I conducted the most important research of my life. While my parents sat in the waiting room, believing I was arranging financing for Jake's surgery, I was actually uncovering the full, shocking extent of their deception. My first call was to my bank's fraud department. After explaining the situation and providing documentation numbers from the papers I'd photographed, the representative walked me through every unauthorized transaction from the past 3 years. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice grave, "based on what I'm seeing here, you have grounds for serious fraud charges. These signatures don't match your authenticated signature card, and several of these loans show evidence of identity theft." "What about the home equity loan Jake mentioned?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Let me check that account." There was a pause, the sound of keyboard clicks filling the silence. That loan was approved for $65,000, not $15,000. It was fully disbursed 6 months ago. My stomach dropped, a sickening lurch. $65,000. What happened to the other $50,000? I asked, my voice tight. "I can't provide specifics over the phone, but I can tell you the funds were transferred to multiple accounts, some of which appear to be investment portfolios." Investment portfolios. My parents had taken out a massive loan against their house, told Jake it was for $15,000 in home improvements, and invested the rest, all while using my surgery money for his birthday party. My second call was to the county assessor's office. Public records showed my parents owned not just our family home, but also a rental property on Maple Street that generated $1,200 a month in income, a property I had never known existed. The third call was to Edward Financial Services, whose business card I'd found in my father's desk. "Eddie Hartwell speaking," came the cheerful voice. "Mr. Hartwell, this is Tommy Thompson. I believe you handle my parents' investment accounts." "Frank and Carol Thompson." "Tommy, of course. Your parents speak about you all the time. Are you finally ready to start investing some of your hard-earned money?" My blood chilled, a slow, terrifying realization dawning. "My parents talk about me." "Oh yes. They're very proud of how responsible you are. Frank was just saying last week how you've been working extra shifts to pay for medical expenses. Real character building," he said. "Not like these young people who expect everything handed to them." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white. "Mr. Hartwell, can you tell me about my parents' current portfolio value?" "Well, I can't give exact numbers without authorization, but they're doing quite well. The mutual funds and index investments have performed excellently this year. Plus, that real estate income stream and the recent deposit from their home equity loan. I'd estimate they're sitting pretty comfortably, probably close to $200,000 in total assets." $200,000. My parents had been crying poor while sitting on a fortune that could have covered both Jake's surgery and my surgery multiple times over. "The recent deposit you mentioned," I said carefully, my voice an exercise in control, "from the home equity loan?" $50,000 invested in a balanced portfolio last spring. Smart move, really. At their age, they needed something generating better returns than a savings account. I thanked Mr. Hartwell, my hands shaking with a silent, furious rage as I hung up the phone. Sarah found me 20 minutes later, still in the consultation room, pages of notes spread across the table like a damning indictment. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice soft, sitting beside me. "Evidence," I said simply, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "My parents aren't broke, Sarah. They're not even close to broke." I walked her through everything: the hidden rental property, the $200,000 in investment accounts, the home equity loan they'd lied about, the systematic theft from my accounts, while they secretly accumulated wealth. "They've been playing poor while building an investment portfolio," I concluded, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. They took out a $65,000 loan, told Jake it was for $15,000 in home improvements, invested the remaining $50,000, and used my surgery money for his birthday party because they didn't want to touch their own assets. Sarah stared at the documents, her face slowly draining of color. I can't even process this level of manipulation. It gets worse, I said, showing her my notes from the call with their financial advisor. According to Mr. Hartwell, they've been bragging about my work ethic and financial responsibility. Sarah's nursing background had taught her to remain calm in crisis, but I watched her professional composure crack, a flicker of raw indignation crossing her face. They've been watching you skip meals and drive a falling-apart car while sitting on $200,000, she asked, her voice tight with suppressed anger. And laughing about it? Apparently, I said, a bitter laugh escaping me. The financial advisor said they think it's good for young people to learn the value of hard work. I gathered up all the documents, the rustle of paper loud in the suddenly quiet room, and stood. Come on, it's time to confront them with the truth. We found my parents in the waiting room where we had left them. My mother clutched a tissue, her eyes red-rimmed. My father stared at his phone, a vacant look on his face. Tommy, thank goodness, my mother said, her voice laced with relief, misinterpreting my return. Were you able to arrange financing? I was able to arrange some things, I said, my voice devoid of warmth, sitting across from them, Sarah beside me. Tell me about your rental property on Maple Street. My father's face went completely white, his phone clattering to the floor. How did you find out about that? My mother whispered, her voice barely audible. The same way I found out about your $200,000 in investment accounts, I replied, my voice dangerously calm, and the $65,000 home equity loan you lied to Jake about. I placed the printed records on the coffee table, a stark indictment in the sterile room. I spent an hour on the phone with your financial advisor, Eddie Hartwell. Interesting guy. Very chatty once he thought I was a potential client. My parents sat in stunned silence as I continued, each word a carefully aimed dart. He told me how proud you are of my work ethic. How you think it builds character for young people to struggle financially. How you've been laughing about my financial difficulties while building an investment portfolio with stolen money. My mother was crying openly now, great, racking sobs. Tommy, you don't understand, my father started, his voice a desperate plea. I understand perfectly, I interrupted, my voice sharp, unforgiving. You've been systematically stealing from me for years while accumulating enough wealth to pay for both surgeries without even touching your principal investments. You've been teaching me the value of hard work by making sure I never benefit from mine. Here's another lens to view this through, the concept of financial abuse within families. While often associated with elder abuse or spousal relationships, it manifests here as parents deliberately exploiting a child's financial resources for their own gain and that of another child, while simultaneously creating a narrative that justifies their actions and diminishes the victim. This insidious form of control and exploitation can be deeply traumatic, eroding trust and fostering a sense of betrayal that is incredibly difficult to heal. My mother tried to speak, her voice choked by tears. We thought you wanted to make sure I developed good work habits by stealing from me. I cut her off, my voice rising. By forging my signature, by spending my surgery money on a party while Jake suffered in agony. Sarah leaned forward, her voice cutting through the emotional haze. You have enough money to pay for Jake's surgery right now, tonight, without affecting your long-term financial security at all. That money is for our retirement, my father said weakly, desperately clinging to his last excuse. And Tommy's money was for his surgery, Sarah countered, her voice ice cold. Jake's insurance premiums were for his medical care. Where does your responsibility to your children factor into your retirement planning? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where ambulances continued to arrive, the flashing lights a stark reminder of the stakes. Here's what's going to happen, I said without turning around, my voice resonating with an authority I hadn't known I possessed. You're going to pay for Jake's surgery using your own money. All of it, including any follow-up care and rehabilitation he needs. Tommy, my mother started, a fresh wave of tears. I'm not finished, I said, turning back to face them, my gaze unwavering. You're going to repay every penny you stole from me with interest calculated at the same rate as the loans you took out in my name, and you're going to do it immediately, not in installments. My father's shoulders sagged, the weight of his actions finally crushing him. That would be most of our liquid assets. Good, I said, my voice devoid of pity. Maybe then you'll understand what it feels like to worry about money. I pulled out my phone and opened Jake's text message. Oh, and one more thing. Jake recorded your entire confession earlier. Every admission of theft, every explanation of your justifications, every detail about how you've been manipulating both of us. The color drained from both their faces, leaving them deathly pale. You what? My mother whispered, the sound a ragged gasp. Smart kid, my brother. Smarter than you gave him credit for. Certainly smarter than you expected when you were stealing money and lying about it. I showed them Jake's message on my phone. He sent me this while we were outside. He knows everything, and he is proof of everything. My parents looked at each other with the expression of people who had just realized their entire world was crumbling around them, a chilling tableau of defeat. Now, I said, my voice firm, let's go pay for Jake's surgery so he can start recovering from the damage you've caused. The walk back to Jake's room felt like a funeral procession. My parents moved with the shuffling gait of people completely defeated, their spirits crushed, while Sarah and I flanked them like guards escorting prisoners. The sterile hospital corridors echoed with our footsteps and the distant beeping of medical equipment, each sound a reminder of the gravity of the situation. Jake was awake when we entered, propped up on pillows, phone in hand. The color had returned to his face, a fragile vitality, but his eyes held a mixture of pain and a fierce determination I'd never seen before. Did you tell them? He asked me directly, his voice steady. I told them about the money, I replied, my gaze meeting his. All of it. Jake looked at our parents, who remained standing near the door, almost shrinking into themselves, as if afraid to come closer. I heard everything you said in the dining room, he told them, his voice gaining strength with each word. About the stolen money, about the forged signatures, about how you thought it was character building for Tommy to struggle. Jake, we can explain, our mother said, taking a tentative step toward his bed, her hands clasped in front of her. Stop, Jake said firmly, his voice surprisingly strong, resolute. I don't want to hear explanations. I want to hear you admit what you did. Our father cleared his throat, a nervous cough. Son, the money situation is complicated. It's not complicated at all, Jake interrupted, his voice rising, imbued with a newfound clarity and conviction. You stole from Tommy for years. You made him work himself into exhaustion while you built investment portfolios. You spent his surgery money on my birthday party and let me think you were sacrificing for me. Jake held up his phone, the small device a powerful weapon. I've been recording everything since Tommy left for the office, including the part where you admitted you could afford my surgery, but don't want to touch your retirement funds. The silence in the room was broken only by the steady, rhythmic beeping of Jake's heart monitor, a stark reminder of his precarious condition. We worked hard for that money, our father said finally, his voice a pathetic whimper of self-pity. Tommy worked hard for his money, too, Sarah said coldly, her eyes fixed on my father. But that didn't stop you from taking it. I watched my parents' faces as the full weight of their situation became clear. They were trapped, caught between their own greed and their son's medical emergency, with 2 witnesses and recorded evidence of their crimes. What do you want us to do? Our mother asked, tears streaming down her face, her voice choked with despair. I want you to pay for my surgery, Jake said, his voice unwavering. Using your own money. And I want you to pay Tommy back everything you stole from him. That's most of our savings, our father protested, desperation in his voice. Tommy's surgery money was most of his savings, too, Sarah said, cutting through his excuse like a razor. The difference is he earned his money legally. Jake shifted, wincing, but his resolve remained unbroken. There's something else, he said, his voice softer now, but no less impactful. I've been thinking about this, and I realize you didn't just steal money. You stole trust. You stole my relationship with my brother. He looked directly at our parents, his eyes burning with a deep, quiet pain. For years, I thought Tommy was selfish. I thought he had money and just didn't want to help family. I resented him for being successful while I struggled. I didn't know he was struggling too, because you were taking his money to give to me. I felt a knot forming in my throat, a painful realization. Jake was right. Our parents' manipulation had damaged our relationship for years, making us see each other as the problem instead of recognizing the real source of our family's dysfunction. I want to know something, Jake continued, his voice gaining momentum. When you used Tommy's surgery money for my birthday party, did you even consider that he might be in pain? Our mother's face crumpled, her shoulders shaking with sobs. We thought his injury was less serious. He never complained. Because he's not a complainer, Jake said, his voice filled with a fierce loyalty. Because he was raised to be responsible and self-reliant. Because you taught him that asking for help was weakness. Jake turned to me, his eyes pleading. Tommy, show them the recording I sent you. I pulled out my phone and played Jake's message, his voice filling the sterile room. Tommy, don't blame yourself for this. I know what they did to you. I recorded everything on my phone before the ambulance came. They can't lie anymore. But there was more. Jake's voice continued, stronger now, almost defiant. Mom, Dad, if you're listening to this later, I want you to know that I would rather be paralyzed than let Tommy sacrifice any more for your mistakes. He's done enough. He's given enough. If you love me at all, you'll pay for this surgery yourself and leave Tommy alone. The room fell silent, save for my mother's quiet sobbing, a raw sound of anguish. Jake, our father started, his voice thick with emotion. I'm not finished, Jake said, cutting him off, his gaze fixed on our parents. I've made my own mistakes. I've been lazy and irresponsible, and I've taken advantage of Tommy's generosity without questioning where the money came from, but I'm done being your pawn in this game. He struggled to reach his bedside table and pulled out a manila envelope. These are copies of all my medical records, he said, his voice strained, including the MRI results that show I need surgery more urgently than Tommy does. I'm giving them to Tommy so he can make the decision about what happens next. Jake held out the envelope to me, his arm trembling slightly. If you want to let me suffer the consequences of their choices, I'll understand. If you want to help me despite everything they've done, I'll be grateful. But whatever you decide, it's your choice, not theirs. I stared at the envelope, understanding the impossible position Jake was putting me in. He was giving me the power to decide his fate while making it clear that our parents would no longer have any say. There's one more thing, Jake said, his voice growing tired, but firm. I'm 25 years old. I'm an adult, and I'm done letting them make decisions for me. He looked directly at our parents, his eyes unwavering. After this is over, however it ends, I don't want to see you again until you've paid back every penny you stole from Tommy and apologized to him publicly for what you've done. Jake, you can't mean that, our mother pleaded, her voice a broken whisper. I mean every word, Jake replied, his voice infused with a deep, quiet anger. Tommy's been more of a parent to me these past few months than either of you have been in years. He's the one who drove me to doctor appointments. He's the one who researched my condition. He's the one who cared enough to notice I was suffering. Jake's voice broke slightly, cracking with raw emotion. And you repaid him by stealing his money and spending it on a party. Our father finally spoke up, his voice barely audible. We'll pay for the surgery, and we'll pay Tommy back. But you have to understand. We thought we were doing the right thing. The right thing, Jake repeated slowly, a bitter edge to his voice. Tell me, Dad, what's the right thing when your son needs surgery and you have the money to pay for it? Our father admitted, to pay for it. And what's the right thing when you've been stealing from your other son for years? Our father couldn't meet Jake's eyes. To stop stealing and pay him back. Then why? Jake asked, his voice rising despite his pain, the question echoing in the silent room. Did it take me nearly dying for you to figure out what the right thing was? Nobody had an answer for that. Jake turned back to me, his eyes filled with a raw honesty that pierced my soul. Tommy, I need to tell you something else. Something I should have said years ago. He paused, gathering his strength, each breath a struggle. I've been jealous of you my whole life. Not because of money or success, but because you have integrity. You work for what you want. You take responsibility for your mistakes. You help people even when they don't deserve it. I've spent so many years wishing I could be like you instead of actually trying to become like you." Tears filled my eyes, a surprising warmth spreading through my chest as Jake continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't deserve your help. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I promise you, if I get through the surgery, I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to become the kind of man you've always been." I took the manila envelope from Jake's hands, the weight of it suddenly immense, knowing that whatever decision I made would define not just his future, but the future of our entire family. And that's when I realized I had one more card to play, one last, decisive move. I walked out of Jake's hospital room without a word, leaving my parents standing beside his bed with expressions of confused terror, their world tilting on its axis. Sarah followed me into the hallway, her hand gently touching my arm. I pulled out my phone and opened Jake's recording app. "What are you thinking?" she asked, her voice hushed. "I'm thinking it's time everyone knew the truth," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion, as I began uploading Jake's recordings to my social media accounts. "Our parents have been lying to our entire family for years. Time to see how they like being exposed." I typed a simple, damning caption. "My parents spent my surgery money on my brother's birthday party, then admitted they've been stealing from me for years while hiding $200,000 in investments. My brother nearly died tonight because they spent his insurance premium money on the party, too. Listen to them admit everything." I tagged every family member I could think of: Uncle David, Aunt Susan, my cousins, our neighbors, family friends, and my coworkers from the auto shop. Then I posted it to the local community Facebook groups where my parents were active members, unleashing a digital firestorm. "Tommy, are you sure about this?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with apprehension. "Once this is out there, it should have been out there years ago," I said, my voice hard, unwavering. "They've been playing victim while stealing from their own children. Everyone deserves to know what kind of people they really are." My phone started buzzing almost immediately, a rapid-fire succession of notifications. The first call came from Uncle David, my father's younger brother, his voice raspy with shock. "Tommy, I just listened to that recording. Please tell me this isn't real." "Every word of it is real, Uncle David," I said, my voice tight. "I have bank statements, forged loan documents, and evidence of financial fraud going back 3 years." There was a long, stunned pause on the other end. "I always wondered how Frank could afford that new boat last summer on his salary, and how Jake could live so well without working much," he said, his voice laced with regret. "I should have asked more questions. They're good at hiding things," I said. "Jake's in the hospital right now needing emergency surgery, and they're refusing to pay for it because they don't want to touch their investment accounts." "What hospital?" Uncle David asked immediately, his voice now firm, authoritative. "I'm coming down there." Within an hour, the hospital waiting room, which had been so sterile and quiet, was filling up with family members. Uncle David arrived first, his face a mask of grim determination, followed by my cousin Maria and her husband Steve. Aunt Susan drove down from Portland with her teenage sons. Even Mrs. Henderson from across the street showed up carrying a casserole and wearing an expression of righteous anger, a visible embodiment of community outrage. The community response was swift and merciless. My parents' phones were ringing constantly with calls from friends, neighbors, and extended family members who had heard the recordings, their voices filled with condemnation. The local Facebook groups were exploding with comments from people sharing their own stories of my parents' manipulative behavior, the truth unspooling in a torrent of collective realization. Mrs. Patterson from across the street posted, "I always wondered why Tommy looked so tired and thin while Frank and Carol bragged about their investment returns. Now I know they were literally stealing from their own son." Jake's former high school friends shared stories about how my parents had always treated him like a golden child while dismissing me as the responsible one who didn't need help. My coworker Danny posted, "Tommy's been eating bologna sandwiches for lunch every day for 2 years while working overtime to save for surgery. Meanwhile, his parents were stealing his money to throw parties. This is sick." But the most devastating response came from Father Mackenzie at St. Mary's Catholic Church, where my parents had been active members for 20 years. He posted a lengthy response on the church's Facebook page. I am deeply saddened to learn about the financial abuse that has occurred within one of our parish families. Stealing from one's own children violates fundamental Christian principles of love, honesty, and stewardship. Frank and Carol Thompson are no longer welcome to participate in church leadership until they have made full restitution and sought proper counseling. My parents' social circle collapsed in real time. The country club friends, the investment club, the neighborhood association, everyone was distancing themselves as quickly as possible, a stark social consequence for their actions. Around 10:30 that evening, Jake texted me from his hospital bed. Surgery is scheduled for 6 a.m. tomorrow. Uncle David already talked to the financial office. Everything is paid for. I went back to his room and found him sitting up, looking more alert than he had in weeks, a quiet strength emanating from him. How do you feel about all this? I asked, gesturing toward the window where we could see cars in the parking lot filled with family members who had come to support us. Honestly, Jake said, a small, genuine smile gracing his lips, I feel free for the first time in my life. I don't have to pretend to be perfect anymore. I don't have to live up to their expectations. I can just focus on getting better and figuring out who I actually am. He paused, his gaze meeting mine. And I feel like I have my brother back. I sat in the chair beside his bed, a profound sense of relief washing over me. You never lost me, Jake. I was always here. I just didn't know how to help you without enabling them. You helped me anyway, Jake said, his eyes softening. You drove me to appointments. You researched my condition. You figured out what was really wrong when they were too busy planning parties to notice I was suffering. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the unspoken understanding between us a powerful new foundation. Tommy, Jake said finally, breaking the quiet. What happens after my surgery? To them, I mean. I looked out the window at the family members still gathered, a silent vigil. I think they're going to learn what it feels like to face consequences for their actions, I said, my voice thoughtful. And maybe if they're willing to do the work, they might become better people. Do you think they can change? He asked, a hint of doubt in his voice. I considered the question, the complexities of human nature swirling in my mind. I don't know, Jake, I admitted, but for the first time in our lives, they're going to have to try. 6 months later, I stood in the doorway of Jake's physical therapy clinic, a bright, modern space filled with the quiet hum of machines and the determined grunt of patients. I watched my brother, his movements confident and pain-free, help an elderly woman work through her exercises, his smile genuine as he encouraged her progress. The transformation was remarkable, not just physically, but in every aspect of who he had become. She's doing great, Jake said, walking over after finishing the session, his stride even, his posture strong. 3 weeks ago, she could barely walk 10 feet. Now she's planning to run a 5K with her granddaughter. Sounds familiar, I said, grinning, a warmth spreading through me. Except instead of 5-minute burpees, you're planning to open your own clinic. Jake's face lit up, a brilliant, genuine smile. Did the loan approval come through? I handed him the envelope from First Community Bank. Congratulations, business partner. Jake had graduated from physical therapy school with the highest grades in his class, discovering a passion for helping others that had surprised everyone. The work was challenging and meaningful, nothing like the aimless partying that had defined his early 20s. I still can't believe you want to be business partners with me, Jake said, tearing open the approval letter, his eyes shining. After everything that happened, you've proven yourself over the past 6 months, I said, my hand on his shoulder. Besides, someone needs to keep you from working 20-hour days. It was true. Jake had thrown himself into his studies and rehabilitation with an intensity that bordered on obsession, as if trying to make up for years of wasted time. I had to constantly remind him to take breaks, to breathe. My auto repair shop had grown into the most successful independent garage in town, largely due to word-of-mouth recommendations from community members who had supported us. The honest work and fair pricing had earned customer loyalty no amount of advertising could have purchased. Sarah and I had gotten married in a simple ceremony at Uncle David's house, surrounded by the family members who had rallied around us, a small but fiercely loyal circle. The wedding was everything we wanted, intimate, meaningful, and completely free of drama. My parents had not been invited. "How are they doing?" Jake asked, as if reading my mind, the smile fading slightly. Our parents had spent the past 6 months in intensive financial counseling and therapy, slowly working to understand the damage they had caused. The process had been humbling and painful for them, but necessary for any hope of eventual reconciliation. "Better, I think," I said. "They completed the restitution payments last month. Uncle David says they're actually attending the counseling sessions instead of just showing up." Frank had lost his job at the bank, a direct consequence of the investigation into his conduct, but found work as a bookkeeper for a small nonprofit, earning less than half his previous salary. Carol had taken a part-time position at a grocery store, her first paid employment in 20 years. The lifestyle adjustment had been dramatic, forcing them to confront the reality of living within their means, but it had also given them a perspective they had never possessed. "Are you ready for today?" Jake asked, his voice hinting at a nervous excitement. Today was Thanksgiving, exactly 1 year after the confrontation that had changed everything. We were hosting dinner at my house for the first time, with Uncle David, Aunt Susan, and several cousins joining us. And for the first time in 6 months, our parents had been invited to attend. "I think so," I said, a flicker of my own nerves bubbling up. "Sarah's been cooking since yesterday. Uncle David is bringing his famous stuffing, and you're responsible for not collapsing dramatically during dinner." Jake laughed, a full, genuine sound that warmed the air. "I'll try to contain myself." The conditions for our parents' invitation had been clear: a public apology to both of us, complete financial restitution, 6 months of counseling, and a written commitment to ongoing therapy. They had met every requirement, though the emotional work was far from finished. At 3 o'clock, cars began arriving. Uncle David and Aunt Susan came first, carrying dishes and warm hugs. My cousins followed, filling the house with laughter and an energy that had been missing from our family gatherings for years. At 3:30, my parents' car pulled into the driveway. I watched from the window as they sat for a moment, gathering courage. They looked older than their 58 and 56 years, the stress and consequences having taken a visible toll, etched onto their faces. But they also looked humbler, more genuine than I had ever seen them. Jake joined me at the window. "They look nervous," he observed. "Good," I said. "They should be nervous. They're trying to rebuild relationships they spent years destroying." Sarah appeared beside us, a soft smile on her face. "Should I let them in, or are you going to make them stand on the porch all evening?" I opened the door before my parents could knock. "Mom, Dad," my mother said quietly, holding a small wrapped package, her voice trembling slightly. "Tommy, thank you for inviting us." "Don't thank me yet," I said, stepping aside, a flicker of wry humor in my voice. "You haven't made it through dinner." The afternoon was awkward, but not hostile. My parents sat quietly while Uncle David told stories, their gazes often drifting to Jake and me. They listened intently as Jake described his physical therapy program and clinic plans, a flicker of genuine pride in their eyes. They watched as Sarah and I moved around the kitchen together, clearly happy and well-matched, a tangible display of the loving, functional relationship they had almost destroyed. When we sat down to eat, Uncle David, ever the diplomat, asked everyone to share something they were grateful for. The responses ranged from health and family to new opportunities and second chances. When it was my father's turn, he cleared his throat nervously, his hands clasped tightly. "I'm grateful for consequences," he said, surprising everyone, his voice rough with emotion. "I know that sounds strange, but this past year has taught me that consequences are a gift. They force you to see the truth about yourself and the damage you've caused." He looked directly at Jake and me, his eyes filled with a raw vulnerability. "I'm grateful that my sons were strong enough to stand up to me when I was wrong. I'm grateful that my family cared enough to hold me accountable, and I'm grateful for the chance to try to earn back your trust, even though I know I may never fully succeed." My mother wiped her eyes, a small, tremulous smile on her face. "I'm grateful for therapy," she said with a slight, self-deprecating laugh. I never thought I'd say that, but learning about financial abuse and emotional manipulation has been eye-opening. I'm grateful that I can finally see how much pain I caused and start trying to heal it. When it was my turn, I looked around the table at faces that had become genuinely supportive over the past year, a true family forged in fire. "I'm grateful for the truth," I said, my voice resonating with conviction, even when it was painful to hear and difficult to speak. Truth gives you the foundation to build real relationships instead of ones based on manipulation and lies. Jake spoke last, his voice clear and strong. "I'm grateful for rock bottom," he said, earning surprised looks from some of the family, because that's where I learned the difference between falling down and being knocked down. When you fall down because of your own choices, you can get back up and make different choices. When you're knocked down by other people's selfishness, you can get back up and refuse to be knocked down again. He raised his water glass, a symbolic gesture, to getting back up. After dinner, my parents asked to speak with Jake and me privately. We went out to the back porch, the cool night air a stark contrast to the warmth inside. "We wanted to give you these," my mother said, her voice soft, handing us each an envelope. "It's not money, it's something else." I opened mine to find a handwritten letter, several pages long. "We wrote down every specific thing we did wrong," my father explained, his gaze earnest. "Every lie, every manipulation, every dollar we stole. Our counselor said accountability requires specificity, not just general apologies." I scanned the first page, seeing detailed admissions of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and systematic favoritism that had damaged both of us. We also wrote down our commitment to continue therapy and the specific changes we're making in our behavior, my mother added. "Not because we expect forgiveness, but because you deserve to know we're serious about becoming better people." Jake was reading his letter, tears welling in his eyes. "This must have been hard to write," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The hardest thing we've ever done," my father admitted, his voice cracking. "But not as hard as watching our sons succeed without us, because we were too selfish to be the parents you deserved." We stood in silence for a few minutes, the weight of their words settling between us. "I want you to know," my mother said finally, her voice imbued with a newfound humility, "that we're proud of the men you've become, despite our failures, not because of anything we did, right? Tommy, your integrity and work ethic came from inside you, not from our character building." My father added, his gaze fixed on me, "Jake, your compassion and determination to help others came from your own heart, not from our enabling. You both became good men in spite of us, not because of us," my mother continued, her voice filled with a quiet reverence. "And we're grateful that you turned out better than we taught you to be." As we walked back inside, Jake pulled me aside, a question still lingering in his eyes. "Do you think they'll actually change?" he asked. I watched through the window as our parents helped Sarah clear dishes, moving carefully and respectfully in her kitchen, asking permission before touching anything. "I think they're trying," I said, a hopeful note in my voice. "Real change takes years, not months. But they've done everything we asked them to do, and they're continuing to do the work, even when it's uncomfortable." "Is that enough?" he pressed. I considered the question, the complexities of forgiveness and rebuilding. It's enough to start rebuilding trust, slowly, with boundaries, and with the understanding that earning forgiveness is a process, not an event. Jake nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I can live with that." As the evening wound down, Uncle David pulled me aside, a knowing look in his eyes. "You boys handled this whole situation with more wisdom than most adults twice your age," he said, his voice low and approving. "You stood up for yourselves without becoming cruel. You held people accountable without seeking revenge. And you found a way to keep the door open for healing without making yourselves vulnerable to further abuse." "We had good examples," I said, looking around at the extended family that had supported us, a silent testament to the power of community and good counselors who taught us the difference between forgiveness and enabling. Uncle David smiled, a warm, genuine smile. "Your grandmother would be proud of the men you've become. She always said, The best revenge against people who hurt you is to become so successful and happy that their opinion stops mattering. As I cleaned up the kitchen that evening, the scent of spices and roasting turkey still lingering in the air, Sarah came up behind me and wrapped her arms around my waist, her head resting on my shoulder. "Good first Thanksgiving as hosts?" she asked, her voice soft. "Perfect first Thanksgiving as hosts," I replied, turning to face her, pulling her closer. "Even the hard parts. Do you think things will keep getting better?" I looked around our small house, filled with the warmth of genuine family relationships and honest communication. "I think we've learned that better isn't something that happens to you. It's something you create by making good choices every day and refusing to let other people's dysfunction define your life." The truth was, I had learned that real family wasn't about blood relations or obligations. Real family was about people who showed up for each other honestly, who held each other accountable with love, and who supported each other's growth even when it was difficult. Jake had learned to take responsibility for his choices while still expecting respect and honesty from others. Our parents were learning that love required a sacrifice of their own comfort, not a sacrifice of their children's well-being. And our extended family had learned that staying silent about abuse enables it to continue. Most importantly, we had all learned that consequences aren't punishment. They're teachers. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them face the full consequences of their actions so they have the opportunity to learn and grow. The young man who had sat at that Thanksgiving table a year ago, confused and hurt by his family's betrayal, had grown into someone who understood the difference between fixing people and supporting them, between enabling and loving, between forgiveness and foolishness. As I turned off the kitchen lights and headed upstairs with Sarah, I felt genuinely grateful for the first time in years. Not just for what I had, but for what I had learned. Not just for the people who had supported me, but for the strength I had discovered within myself. Sometimes the greatest gift isn't getting what you want. Sometimes it's getting exactly what you need to become the person you were always meant to be. Now, I want to ask you something important. Have you ever had to choose between enabling someone you love and holding them accountable for their actions? How did you handle that difficult balance between family loyalty and personal boundaries? Share your thoughts in the comments below because your experience might help someone else facing a similar situation.